My grandfather is unfortunately at the end of his life, riddled with dementia and having strokes weekly. He's in hospice, and our family has made peace with his last days. He's unable to recognize any of us, and it's clear that he can no longer perceive the world around him coherently. He's mostly non-speaking now, and will only grumble sometimes when he's in pain or has a primary functional need. I live very close to my grandfather and drop in regularly, although he does have a 24/7 caregiver now. Last Tuesday, his caregiver called me and asked me to come over as she smelled smoke and my grandfather was acting odd. She felt like it might be the surge or terminal lucidity right before death. I came straight over, and as soon as I walked in, the smell of cigarette smoke hit me in the face. We have cameras on in the house at all times to check in, and none of the caregivers smoke. It smelled like an old pool hall. Sure enough, my grandfather was talking in complete, coherent sentences, but he wasn't talking to us. He was talking to Jack. He was talking directly to the corner of the room, giving full details about the plans for the weekend, the lawnmower he had been working on, the plan for the new pool they were going to be installing, issues he's been having with my grandmother. This went on for 20 minutes. We would attempt to speak with my grandfather, but it was like we didn't exist. He couldn't take his eyes off of the corner of the room. The scary part for me is that Jack was a very real person who died about 15 years ago. He was my grandfather's brother-in-law, and they were the best of buds. This, by itself, wouldn't have been that scary, but the smell. Neither of my grandparents were smokers, ever, but Jack was an absolute chain smoker. He was never caught without a cigarette, and he didn't eventually pass away from lung cancer. We checked every possible option in the house that could cause a smoke smell, to no avail. The smell was only in this one room, not outside, not in the next room over. 30 minutes of this went by, and then it stopped. My grandfather became incoherent again, and the smell subsided. It wasn't the surge, because almost a week later he's still with us, and it hasn't happened again. I don't believe in the paranormal. I like the stories, but I've never had an experience that made me a believer. But I do feel that my grandfather is somewhat on the threshold of life and death. And maybe he's able to meet some of his loved ones in the middle. I started narrating stories on YouTube because after sending every story I wrote to all the big names and a few lesser known names, I got no response, no thanks for sending, no your story sucks, nothing. I won't mention who they are, but most of you should know who I'm talking about. Although one big name did read a short story I wrote, which I'm very thankful for, it wasn't my best. This went on for a while. After months of frustration, I finally realized it wasn't going to happen. So, I decided to narrate my own stories, create a YouTube channel, pick a name, and post them myself. How hard could it be? So I did. My stories were good, at least, I thought so. To my surprise, a few people actually liked them, and after a while, asked if I would narrate their stories. Wow, really? Okay. They would send them to me via email, which I gave them, and I would narrate their stories. And that started the ball rolling. I was talking to a coworker one day about narrating stories for fun, and they suggested I check out an app called Reddit and search short scary stories and no sleep. They said they posted a few stories on there and thought it would be perfect for me. So I did. I created an account and started my search. There, I found all kinds of amazing stories. I contacted some authors through comments and personal messages, asking permission to read their stories. Most were cool with it, although I did get a few rejections. I just kept on asking. Always ask permission. Things were going great. I was narrating amazing stories, people were liking them, and I even earned enough karma on Reddit to start my own community. I decided to use it for people to send stories to, and people actually did. All the while, I still searched other communities for stories to read. That was, until I found that story. I should have known by their username it wasn't a good idea. I'm not gonna mention the name of it because it still sends chills up my spine just thinking about it. I'm shaking as I write this. It was about 1 a.m. Insomnia set in, and I was sitting at my dining room table searching Reddit when I found that story, and it just blew me away. It had it all. Drama, suspense, emotion, everything. I contacted the author through personal message, asking permission, except for some reason, I signed it using my real name, not my stage name. Big mistake. I realized what I did, but it was too late. I already sent it. Anyway, mere seconds went by, and I received a reply. Yes, I've been waiting for this. Thinking they've been waiting for someone to read one of their stories, just like I was, I replied, "Thank you," and planned to go on with my night. Until I received my own personal message from the author. "Hi, my name's Susan. Want to talk?" I figured, what the hell? I'm not doing anything else. What could it hurt? So I sent back, "Sure." After about a 30-minute conversation, I found out the author was female. We both like Stephen King. We both love horror stories, and we both live in the US, only a few states away from each other. I started getting tired. I let her know. We ended the conversation, both saying goodnight. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I got a message from her saying, "I'm glad to have someone like you to talk to. I miss that." I shrugged it off and went to sleep. A couple days went by. I came home from work and found a note on my door. It said, "Hi, sorry I missed you. Love, Susan." What the Love? I only talked to her for like a half hour. How'd she get my address? What the did I get myself into? I took the note off the door and quickly went inside, locking the door and calling the police. I told them this story. They said there was nothing they could do until an actual crime was committed. Yeah, that's reassuring. I hung up from them and tried to do my normal routine. Make coffee, get changed, drink coffee, and so on. Couldn't get the note out of my head. The doorbell rang. I froze. Slowly walked to the window to see who it was. It was a woman. She was about 5.5 feet tall, tattered, dirty clothes, long, stringy brown hair. It looked like she hadn't bathed in a month. I knew it was Susan. I had to end this now, before it turned ugly. And ugly it turned. I opened the door and said, "Look, Susan, I don't know what you think is going on, but I just wanted to read your story. That's it. I'm sorry if you thought there was something more, but there's not. Please just go home." I shut the door and walked back into the house. She screamed like a wild woman. She started pounding on the door and screaming, "I love you! I love you!" I ran to the phone to call 911. A rock or brick or something came crashing through the front window. I turned and saw that crazy bitch climbing into my house screaming, "Read my story! Read my story!" The shards of glass from the broken window cutting her as she climbed in, blood on the window and the floor. 911? What's your emergency? Crazy is in, she charged, slamming into me, knocking me over the desk and falling to the floor herself. She was kicking and screaming like a lunatic. Got up, phone still in hand, and smashed it hard against her temple as she was getting up. I don't hit women, but that deserved it. Her eyes rolled back in her head. The screaming stopped, and she fell to the floor, unconscious. I heard sirens outside. I guess the 911 operator heard it all. The cops came and took my statement. They made me stay outside while the paramedics tended to Susan, if that's even her real name. Cops put her in cuffs, and the paramedics took her to the ambulance. On her way out, she looked at me and laughingly said, "I'll be waiting." They put her inside, then left. The cops finished up and did the same. I was left with a f***ed up door, a broken window, blood all over the place, a broken desk, and a broken phone. All over a f***ing story. I'm done. I moved out that night. I left all my stuff behind. Slept in the car till payday, then rented a room from a coworker. And I never narrated another story ever again. So, if any of my subscribers are reading this and wondering whatever happened to me, now you know why I stopped narrating stories on YouTube.